Okay, so as we get started today, our big topic yesterday was discussing what I think we could call the pepsinogen and pepsin mechanism. We haven't quite made our way all the way through that because there's still a couple of individual parts that we need to discuss that actually have a part in that, if you want to call it a chemical reaction or a mechanism, which we really haven't made it to that with organic chemistry yet, because that's one of the aspects that goes along with that class, is not just naming the compounds, but the mechanisms that accompany all of the different types of reactions that could take place. So whether it's a dehydration or halogenation or something to that effect. Okay, but in this mechanism, if pepsin is going to be activated so that you can break down proteins like you would have with the taco, the soft taco that you have, the hamburger that you would consume, okay, for the digestion of that, is that taking place in the stomach or the small intestine? Are we sure? Yes and no is what the answer really is, because when we talk about digestion, okay, we know it's the breakdown of components. So it's not only the breakdown of materials, but also the absorption. So when you look at it in that fashion, where does the breakdown initiate? Well, that would be the stomach. So then where does the absorption take place? Well, of course, that would be within the intestine. And your small intestine is lined with a covering called a lumen that has a lot of those fingers that stick out that have what type of structures in there that we can absorb materials. Those blood vessels, which are capillaries, which we can have that process of diffusion, enters your bloodstream, and then delivered to the cells that would need them. But inside the stomach, okay, we talked about there's actually 3 types of cells you're responsible for, but the main 2 that would deal with digestion are what and what? 2 types we discussed yesterday. Chief cells is one. Starts with a P. What bone is this in the skull, in the cranium? If we remember. See, everyone could take part in that because you had biology last year where we had an introduction to the skeletal system. Right here. That's your parietal bone. So then what type of cells would that be within your stomach then? Same name, your parietal cells. Now, with those 2 types, who is secreting what? You have pepsinogen is secreted by one cell, and hydrochloric acid or just acid is being secreted by the other cell. But which one's which?
Acid is with pepsin. Wait, no. What's parietal?
That's correct. And how or why would you know that the acid is secreted by parietal cells? There's an A in there. Okay? And as we would associate, there's no A in chief cells. Okay? So that's why we know that the acid comes from the parietal cells, the pepsinogen then comes from the chief cells. So why is that important? Because, well, when that pepsinogen is secreted by these cells, is digestion going to take place by pepsinogen alone? If you said no, that would be correct. But why would that be correct? Not absorbed. Has something to do with the acid. Because it's not active yet. Okay? And there's lots of biochemical reactions that would take place in the body where something like this takes place. It's something that could be inactive. Okay? So when we see this, This pepsinogen, then, it's not active when these chief cells secrete it. It's not until the parietal cells release this acid or hydrochloric acid, or however you want to remember that. So then the main enzyme that deals with protein digestion is this one. Okay? There are other types that deal with that. Trypsinogen is one. I believe enterokinase is another. So we discussed your hamstring group. Sometimes there's not just one muscle only that does a specific action. It might be a cluster of those. And that's what we could say with this, with these protein enzymes. There's not just one that does the workload. There's one that might do the majority of it, but there's not one that does all of it. Okay. So why is it that this substance right here, okay, that has to be regulated precisely as food particles are leaving your stomach? Because it's stomach acid. And if we know anything about this stomach acid, it will eat your teeth, or not eat, it will dissolve your teeth if that was inside of your mouth for long enough. You had the right idea, not the gums. It does dissolves not the teeth.
That's just from not brushing your teeth.
Oh.
That is what the
Doctor told you, it dissolves your gums.
Maybe you're right. You are right. It wasn't my gums, but
Okay.
my gums super vulnerable.
Well, see, that I would, yes, I think there's something to be said for that, because has anyone, I don't know why you would do this, I just remember this happening to me. Has anyone ever taken I don't have anything that's really big enough, a car battery, and when you move that around, you hear water inside of there, right? Well, there's probably some tabs that are up top there that's where you would pour the water into. But what happens, I remember carrying one, and I probably had it tipped a little too far like this, so some of that water got on my clothing. All of a sudden, why are my clothes being tattered like this? They're starting to be pulled apart. Well, there's also sulfuric acid that's inside these batteries. So then I don't know if it's totally concentrated, but it just starts breaking things down with anything it comes in contact with. Same thing would happen with this hydrochloric acid. It will start to dissolve materials quite easily. But it doesn't do that in the stomach. Why is that? There's something about something significant inside the stomach lining, and it's a third type of cell. Yeah, it's your mucosa cells that secrete mucus that provides that protective membrane so that this does not have such a damaging effect to your body. So if that's going to move into the small intestine, those do not have mucosa cells. And if they don't have mucosa cells, they can't secrete mucus. And if you can't secrete mucus, that could be vulnerable to this concentrated acid. But if we have a type of protection, or not protection, but a way to regulate that, well, then we might not have so many issues. And this is where we begin today. And this is like we're talking about yesterday. The opposite of acidic is being alkaline. So then that's where these mucosa cells will secrete mucus and then protects that gastric wall, as it says. So one of the things that sometimes this class does overlap quite a bit with the biochemistry that we talk about in the spring, especially when it comes to these structures called hormones. Do we know any hormones besides those that deal with digestion? I would think you'd be able to come up with 3 or 4. You know the answer, you just don't know you know it. What might be some hormones?
Testosterone.
That's one.
Estrogen.
That's two. Now some of them deal with digestion, like especially with sugars. And starts with an I. Oh geez, I had too much ice cream last night. I better take this shot and inject it. I don't know if it goes in here and here. Yeah, insulin. That's a hormone. Then the other less known one would be glucagon. That's something that we will talk about later this chapter. But anyway, moving forward then, how is this regulated? Well, the brain has to do that. In other words, within the central nervous system. So it's hormonal action that does it, and this is one of them right here. Okay? So sometimes, as you can see, you can be producing this gastric, whether you want to say gastric substance, gastric juice, even without eating anything. Something that you can smell or anything to that effect can cause that to take place. Okay. Just wonder if everyone has this I did it without even accident. But had it move forward anyway. And a lot of times we just refer to that as cholestockinin. That's just the way that really not quite sure how you pronounce it, but when we say cholestockinin, we're referring to this hormone that does this. Okay? So, one of the ways that I think makes sense to, well, for me, and try to explain this in your sense then, if you go up to a spigot and just picture that garden hose, okay, is something that has to be turned on to water grandma's flowers. I always just say grandma's flowers. And you don't want to carry a pail back there, so you have a garden hose. Well, you have to turn that water on, okay? So, like inside your stomach, just like that has to be turned on. And it's a hormone that does this. So this gastrin is like turning that spigot on. It's causing water to come out of the hose. It's causing acid to be produced inside the stomach then, okay? That's regulated by the brain or the central nervous system. And again, it's done by these hormones. This is one hormone. The next one is that cholestockinin. So that shuts the tap off. Gastrin turns it on. Cholestockinin turns it off then. Okay? Why does this have to be regulated? Why is that so important? Why does this have to be shut off? I mean, turning on is just as important as having it shut off as well. But if you have too much acid inside your stomach, what's going to happen as that moves forward into the small intestine? Because remember, your small intestine does not have these types of cells. You could burn, well, not burn, but cause holes to appear inside your small intestine because you're producing too much acid in these factories. So sometimes this, and maybe this is hypersensitive, it just keeps going and going and going. But on the other hand, what happens if you're not secreting enough of this? What if this hormone isn't active like it should be? How is it that pepsin is most, effective? Well, we got to back up just a little bit here, okay? Because this enzyme known as pepsin, it's most active in these acidic conditions. Well, if this is not working the way that it should, you're going to have problems digesting some proteins. So yes, it's important that it gets shut off, but it's also important that it gets turned on as well. Okay, so I think we want to start talking about the pancreas tomorrow. So that's where we will begin tomorrow's talking about the pancreas. But we had you grab your books, and so there might be more to this, if you want to call it the story, as opposed to what we're writing down. But that's something that we will try to teach you in this class too, is how to take your own notes, because that's something that you may be responsible for in college, but that's why we just kind of want to show you how to do this. And there's a lot of content in here, so we try to cut some of this out. So just follow along as we read this on page 664. Okay? Do we need to back up one more? Maybe back up to 663, sorry. So it's talking about gastric secretions, the right-hand side on page 663. Okay, the mucous membrane that forms the inner lining of the stomach is thick. Its surface is studded with many small openings called gastric pits that are located in the ends of the tubular gastric glands. Okay? Although their structure and their composition of their secretions vary in different parts of the stomach, gastric glands generally contain 3 types of secretory cells. Okay? One type, the mucous cell, that again the small intestine probably does not have, but the stomach does. Found in the necks of the glands and the openings, I'll get it right, of the gastric pits secrete mucus. The other types, chief cells and parietal cells, reside in the deeper parts of the glands. The chief cells secrete digestive enzymes. Now, if we did not go any further than that, okay, how or why is that not entirely accurate? Notice it says the chief cells secrete digestive enzymes. Because typically when we think of enzyme action, that's something that's going to break something down. It has not reached that component yet. Okay? So really, without going any further, again, these chief cells are secreting what? We haven't read it yet, but we have wrote it down. No.
Whoa, that's what I meant.
No.
Chief cells?
Correct.
Pepsin.
No.
Pepsin something. I forgot the name.
Yeah. Pepsinogen.
Yeah, same
Yeah.
thing.
Okay. So, again, the chief cells secrete digestive enzymes. The parietal cells release a solution containing hydrochloric acid, or HCl. The products of the mucous cells, chief cells, and parietal cells together form gastric juice. Again, gastric juice is a vague term. Okay, so it's got mucus in it, it's got acid in it, and it probably has pepsinogen in it. Okay, just like what are components of saliva then? Water is one, mucus is a second component, and the third is an enzyme that is active. Amylase, that's right. Okay, so then pepsin is by far the most important of the digestive enzymes in gastric juice. The chief cells secrete pepsin. Chief cells secrete pepsin as an inactive neurosive enzyme precursor called pepsinogen. When pepsinogen contacts the hydrochloric acid from the parietal cells, however, it breaks down rapidly, forming pepsin. Pepsin, in turn, can also break down pepsinogen to release more pepsin. So you could say that it's like a cascade or a wave that just keeps this cycle going and going and going. Why would that be important? Well, guys, like we discussed this already. The stomach is a muscle, so it can stretch. We're at Hoo-Ha or KFC or this Pizza Ranch. I paid this much money. I'm getting my money's worth. So then, again, this just keeps cycling and cycling until it just gets turned off because it can be a vicious one. So what is it that's probably going to stop this? Something in the central nervous system sends a signal to your stomach that says, slow down here. We want this acid tap to be shut off. What does that? Yeah, cholestyramine. Yes. Okay. So we'll read about that here in just a moment as well. Pepsin begins the digestion of nearly all types of dietary protein into polypeptides. The enzyme is most active in an acidic environment, which is provided by the hydrochloric acid in gastric juice. Gastric juice contains small quantities of fat-splitting enzyme called gastric lipase. Pretty much a lot of the lipase we talk about is going to come from the pancreas, not from the stomach. Okay. However, its action is weak due in part to the low pH of gastric juice. Okay. Gastric lipase acts mainly on butterfat. Okay. So then let's skip over to page 665. Okay, regulation of gastric secretions. Gastric juice is produced continuously, but the rate varies considerably and is controlled both neurally and hormonally. Okay, so then what are our two hormones? Cholestyramine was one. What is the other?
G.
It starts with a G, yes. And it's on that page. Yeah, gastin. Okay. In the gastric glands, specialized cells closely associated with the parietal cells secrete the hormone somatostatin, which inhibits acid secretion. However, acetylcholine, released from nerve endings in response to parasympathetic impulses arriving in the vagus nerves, suppresses the secretion of somatostatin and stimulates the gastric glands to secrete abundant gastric juice, which is rich in hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen. Okay. These parasympathetic impulses also secrete certain stomach cells, also stimulate certain stomach cells, mainly in the pyloric region. Okay. So, pyloric region, is that the top or the bottom of the stomach? If we didn't go think of the openings to the stomach. What are your two openings? One on the top, one on the bottom. Think of heartburn. The top is your cardiac opening or cardiac sphincter, and then the bottom must be what we just read, your pyloric opening, okay? So in the pyloric region to release a peptide hormone called gastrin, okay, which increases the secretory activity of gastric glands. Furthermore, parasympathetic impulses and gastrin promote release of a histamine from gastric mucosal cells, which in turn stimulates additional gastric secretion. Okay, and we're not going to read all that. Should be talking about that next hormone. Page 666. Okay. The left column about, a quarter of the way down the page where it says the intestinal phase, okay? So then the intestinal phase primarily inhibits gastric juice secretions. As more food moves into the small intestine, a sympathetic reflex triggered by acid in the upper part of the small intestine inhibits secretion of gastric juice from the stomach wall. At the same time, proteins and fats in this region of the intestine stimulate the release of a peptide hormone called acetylcholine from the intestinal wall, which decreases gastric motility. Okay, so then I think that's good enough for that. But now, what I wanted you to do, you have this in your handout, okay? So figure 17.3, page 652, okay? So if we back that up to page 652, okay, you have, okay, so figure 17.3, I was looking for a specific diagram. So if it's figure 17.3, it looks like it's all of that, okay? So it says the wall of the small intestine, this is where it says figure 17.3. The wall of the small intestine, as in other portions of the alimentary canal, consists of 4 layers: an inner mucosa, a submucosa, and a muscular layer, an outer serosa. Okay? So when we're talking about the serosa, I mean that's a type of lining in many internal organs as well. Okay, 1719, page 664, jumping ahead quite a bit. Okay, so there you have figure 1719. So would you just get somewhat familiar with that? If we were talking about the gastric pits, okay, even if you weren't looking at that diagram, what type of cells are you going to find within those gastric pits? There's 3 of them. That's one. Parietal cells, and then, nope, that would be the hormone. We said that already. Yeah, your chief cells. Okay, so that's what that figure deals with. Then figure 17.23 on page 668. Okay, now we'll talk more about that in the future. I just want you to have some exposure to that, especially when it comes to all of the duct work with the gallbladder, the liver, and what's draining into the small intestine. Okay? Now remember, you're Gesundheit. You're looking at a mirror image. So what you're looking at on the right side is actually on the left. You got to keep that in mind. So when you're looking at a Y that's up on top of that, okay? When I'm talking about the Y, it's right up here where this comes down and then empties into this type of ductwork, okay? The reason that's important is because the gallbladder does not produce bile, okay? Bile is only stored in the gallbladder. That bile has to be produced by something way more complex than the gallbladder. And if it's not the pancreas, what gland might that be that's an accessory organ to the digestive system? It would be your liver. So when you're naming different types of blood vessels, okay, if you're talking about a hepatic artery and a hepatic vein, that's Latin for liver. So that's why you have these hepatic ducts, okay, because the hepatic means the liver. Duct just means an opening that's carrying, or not an opening, but a tube that's carrying some sort of secretion. So up top, you have the hepatic ducts left and right, and then when that comes down to a specific channel, it empties into a cystic duct. The cystic duct then comes from the gallbladder, and then eventually all 3 of those together, the hepatics, the cystic duct, then finally make the common bile duct. And what happens is that just trickles its way down into the small intestine, and you see that if the enlargement of that, okay, This box here is illustrating an enlargement of these two sphincters here. One is the pancreas, then the other is from the common bile duct. And just think like your cardiac sphincter that opens and closes. The pyloric sphincter is another one, just opens and closes. This is really no different. It's a stimulus from your brain that's going to cause them to open. And when that does that, gravity should do its work. The bile then just drains down into your small intestine. Okay? But sometimes what can happen is if you have bleeding taking place somewhere further up the line from the small intestine, if these sphincters, if they get damaged and there's lots of pressure from blood coming down, if they start to prolapse and open up, you can end up with blood inside the small intestine. That would be an important diagnostic tool because one of your questions on your paper deals with that, because it's talking about a construction worker that comes to the emergency room that the doctor sees that, okay, the small intestine is really not damaged as much as what he's showing, because he might go into shock from blood pressure dropping too low, but the CT scan says there is lots of damage to that liver. Okay, so the liver's bleeding, it's draining down into the gallbladder, and all that pressure is causing that blood to go into the small intestine, even though the small intestine itself is not damaged at all. That's just a hypothetical question that we put there to make you think. All right, so I think that's enough for today. We'll continue talking about the pancreas tomorrow. Especially the biggest thing is looking at page 668, where it's talking about this duct work from the pancreas, the liver, the gallbladder, into the small intestine. All right, so we'll catch up to you next time.